So I'm sure that you've heard the news that some fatherless, friendless piece of face geek managed to leak over 2.9 billion records, including 300 million social security numbers onto the internet because God help us if we can go a day without some middle income IT tech proving the doomsday preppers actually had a point. That was a heck of a show, man. They really should have kept that on. Luckily for you, though, that's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Cut, Clarence. Aura alerts you when any of your private information is leaked onto the dark web, like your email, phone number, address, and yes, of course, your social security number. They'll also alert you if anyone tries to use that information to access your credit and or bank accounts. So protect your neck today by going to aura.com/lilbill or click the link in the description for a free 14-day trial. Why? Because the joint that got jacked in the first ain't gonna do anything about it. You know how this goes by now. Be smart, dog, and do something to protect yourself. Again, go to aura.com/lilbill or click on the link in the description for 14 days free. That's 2 weeks, so one check's worth of time for the first and 15ths in the audience. Do it for your kids. Do it for freedom. Do it for America. I don't know, man. Whatever. Just make sure nobody is trying to steal nothing from out of your account, man. Just be smart. All right, so let me preface this video by saying that it is in no way, shape, or form an endorsement of criminals or crime of the organized or any other sort. And I know that for those of y'all with sense, I don't really have to explain that, but I also know that I'm probably on like 3 or 4 government watch lists at this point, so I'm not leaving anything to chance is my point. That said, for a brief, and I mean very brief, like maybe 2 weeks, if that, period of time in my teenage years, I lived with my dad. Or more accurately, my mom had kicked me out of the house for reasons I'm not going to bother getting into in front of strangers on the internet. And it also coincided with a time in which my dad lived literally up the street and around the corner from my mom. So I just kind of broke into his side window one day with a book bag full of wife beaters and drawers and a milk crate carrying an 8-week-old pit bull puppy. Because, I mean, what was he going to do? Call the cops? Low-key, I wouldn't have been surprised if he did. Just keep it a buck. Anyway, during this period, my dad didn't have cable, and I don't know if that was because he didn't want it or he just didn't want the bill. Either way, it's justified. I get it. That doesn't matter. But what he did have was one of those combo DVD VHS players that were all the rage in the mid 2000s, and also a stack of West Coast production DVDs, which kind of explains my taste in women now, and also my crippling body dysmorphia. But right in front of his very poorly hidden spank bank material stack, at the top of his closet were more family friendly viewing options, if you want to call them that, including Gladiator, the complete series of Good Times, and Fat Albert, not to mention the Mac and Coley High, which he found on DVD somehow, which is like finding a gym without a tripod set up in front of the squat rack these days. Among these and others was a film that I'm willing to bet most of y'all have never heard of, even the crime flick fanatics out there. And that was the 1997 crime drama Hoodlum that starred Lawrence Fishburne as notorious Harlem kingpin Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson.
Huh?
Yeah, this is the part where the editor plays the cricket track. Jokes aside, though, Bumpy was actually a pretty big deal in the New York underworld for a good like 4 decades or so. And I'm not just talking about to black folks. Matter of fact, he, and for that matter, Stephanie St. Clair, who was technically his boss, are the main reason the New York Mafia's sphere of influence pretty much stopped at East Harlem after the death of Dutch Schultz. And Schultz himself probably never would have become so strong in that neighborhood if he didn't have the Metro in his pocket and the mob behind his back. Matter of fact, after the hit on Schultz that he actually placed himself, Lucky Luciano decided that Harlem was just way too much of a headache because of Bumpy, and wound up brokering a deal with him that kept the mob out of Harlem so long as Lucky's outfit got a cut of the profit. But the relationship between Johnson and Luciano didn't stop with just that stalemate. Johnson had deep connections with the Genovese crime family up until basically his own death, even meeting regularly with Luciano to play chess until the latter got sent upstate. Part of the reason Bumpy became the godfather of Harlem was because the actual godfather, or at least one of them, was both his plug and protection. And again, this is the 30s we're talking about. Black and Italian gangsters collaborating, let alone cavorting in public together, was rarer than an Olympic barbell at Planet Fitness. Yeah, I'm working through something here, folks. Just bear with me, man. Bumpy, as do most kingpins, honestly, became something of a celebrity and a bit of a folk hero among the blacks in Harlem, often having columns written about him in the celebrity section of Jet magazine. And though, yeah, it's fair to say that the relationship between he and Lucky was, we'll call it a less than equal partnership, the fact remains that a black man stood up to the mob, its associates, and if we're going to be real, by extension, the police. And even if he had won the war, he didn't really lose it either. And in doing so, won the respect of his foes in the 30s. And I cannot stress that part enough. We couldn't even serve in the army with white folks by this point. And yet, most of y'all outside of maybe the true crime enthusiasts hadn't heard of him until that cameo in American Gangster. Like, it's wild to me the number of true crime tales centering black people that have been left untold in traditional media, considering that aside from, fat fodder, that's apparently all we're good for. I mean, yeah, Bumpy has gotten his flowers more recently in the Godfather of Harlem series and also that aforementioned part in the Frank Lucas movie, but that's the thing. If you have even a cursory knowledge of New York crime lore, Lucas was like a weight class below the real heavyweights like Nicky Barnes, for example, the man who started the Council, aka the Commission Dub Edition, or Frank Matthews, the literal one that got away. What, a $20 million bag, no less. And this isn't even counting Eddie Jackson out in Detroit or alphabet outfits like JBM in West Philly or YBI in Detroit again. Or because y'all love gangland content so much, apparently, how about a Larry Hoover movie? Or better yet, Tookie freaking Williams. Like, talk about a redemption arc, man. Get the Lucas brothers for the script and Boots Riley to direct it. And it's like instant Oscar bait. Just for the love of God, don't let Idris Elba anywhere near the lead. He can be like Neighborhood Crip #2 or something. I really don't care, man. The point I think I'm getting at is there is no shortage of material out there. If you really want to do a prestige crime drama with a black lead that isn't just emotion porn or poverty tourism with a Hollywood budget behind it. But that's kind of the issue, isn't it? When you think of works like The Goodfellas, Casino, The French Connection, the Godfather trilogy, or even non-Italian crime flicks like Black Mass or The Departed, or even The Irishman, you don't really think about the struggle that led those characters down a path to taking on crime as their profession to begin with. I mean, I'd argue that the actual crime being committed in those films is secondary, even tertiary to the main plot and themes. When you think about it, if you take away all the murders and the drug deals, Goodfellas at its core is a coming of age tale centered around identity and loyalty and how the two both inform and conflict with each other depending on where you are in life and perhaps more importantly, where the people around you are going. Casino is the story of a friendship gone sour because of ego, greed, and ambition. The Godfather is the movie that romanticized organized crime. The mob is really just a family business at EOD, at least according to Puzo and Coppola. A family built on the ideas of honor, tradition, and again, loyalty. Now go watch The Wire and tell me if you get that. Exactly, bucko. Now listen, The Wire is one of my favorite dramas of all time, for the record. And if you look close enough, you can see similar themes. But if we're going to keep it a buck, at EOD, crime is the plot. More specifically, the fallout of it. Violent crime at that. And that's because that's what culture and by extension media and by extension culture, thinks blackness boils down to, if we're going to be real. It isn't until black people take on the task of telling our own stories that we do get paid in full or hoodlum or dead presidents. That is to say, a crime drama that's focused more on the drama than it is the crime. And that's the journey we're going to go on today. Half a walk down memory lane and half an exploration into the evolution of the black crime drama, which are not necessarily all hood flicks or vice versa. And if you did think that, then congratulations, bucko. You are the problem. But mostly I want to use this to explore the ever-evolving depiction of blackness in popular media and thereby the boomerang effect it has on the black experience. How in the process of telling our own stories, the message gets a bit muddled sometimes because the person hearing it didn't pay close enough attention. And I'm going to use one film in particular to try to make this point. So, cut the title card, Clarence. Clarence. Okay, so it's kind of obligatory that any discussion on Black American film has to start with blaxploitation, right? I mean, if you do want to be a pedantic pissant about it and say that black people have been around in Hollywood since basically its birth, then okay. But we're not talking about Bojangles on this channel unless it's about a blueberry biscuit and an iced tea. Anyway, like I've mentioned in the past, most blacks who weren't Sidney Poitier or a light-skinned woman struggled to find roles that weren't supporting at best, and even those more than often fell into one of like 3 or 4 designated tropes that were pretty much mandated by the Hays Code, and I'm only like halfway joking about that. With the repeal of said code in 1968 came the revival and revision of many genres of film as much more gritty and oftentimes gruesome versions of those genres, most notably the Western and the crime thriller. It also allowed for a greater degree of artistic freedom from filmmakers, allowing them to move beyond the black and white hat morality dichotomy they'd been restricted to in the 40 years prior. This inevitably led to the creation of more morally complex characters and stories that often served as vehicles for social commentary. This was the environment in which blaxploitation was born, and it took the lessons of popular mainstream films of the time and just turned the camp up to like 11 and the Afro Sheen to 12. And while, yeah, at the time and even today, blaxploitation films were and are kind of low-key problematic, they did something that films to that point hadn't dared to do. They promoted a message of black nationalism, even anti-capitalism, casting the establishment as the unequivocal antagonist to black identity in those films and ergo in real life. The exaggerated depictions of sex, crime, and violence were done so on purpose to invoke a response from an audience that otherwise would have just treated them like just another action movie or skin flick. These films at EOD were a social commentary on the black inner city experience. And as we've established many times on this channel, nobody really listens to the hood until the hood gets too loud to ignore. Hey, how about that? Not like us. No one else was doing that or even tried to. Instead, they pointed to the respectability of Poitier as the ideal, liberation by assimilation, if you will. And I mean, this is no shade to my Bahamian brethren or sisters, so Ole and Foreign Man, I really hope that y'all heard that part. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because it has a couple birth defects is kind of sus, if you ask me, especially for so-called progressive blacks for whom give us free is basically y'all's whole identity. But then again, this is how some of y'all treat hoteps also. And yeah, don't worry, that video is coming soon. Yeah, I got y'all. Matter of fact, the titular character of Sweetback's badass song is low-key exactly what Fanon meant when he said that the self-described revolutionaries should probably spend less time playing each other's skin flutes for how brave they are to say something bad about capitalism and actually recruit from the class of people most likely to actually do something, you know, revolutionary. Y'all getting this, bread tube? I mean, probably not. I'm not a white man with a beard. I should probably hit up Sammy Sosa to see who he talked to. My point is, without Superfly, without Cleopatra Jones, without Dolomite, you don't get Judas and the Black Messiah. You don't get Sorry to Bother You or Get Out. They cloned Tyrone. I'm a Virgo, and so on. You don't even get Do the Right Thing or Boys in the Hood. By the mid 70s, largely due to the disdain expressed by those boule blacks, blaxploitation was kaput. But the legacy lived on in the films of Spike Lee, John Singleton, and probably the most important in the context of this discussion, Mario Van Peebles. Van Peebles, who coincidentally is the son of Melvin Van Peebles, aka Sweet Sweetback, is kind of one of those underflowered black all-stars who you don't really know too much about unless you are a black film connoisseur, which admittedly I'm not really, to be honest. He was Malcolm X and Ali. He starred and directed in that horrible Black Panther movie from the mid-90s. He's been in like an episode or two of Living Single, I think. Basically, he's the light-skinned Clifton Powell, that one dude from that one thing and also that other thing whose face you remember but name you can't really place. Van Peebles' most notable role to me, however, is probably in the film that we're going to spend the bulk of our time discussing today. New Jack City was kind of a watershed moment in black cinema, if you ask me, even though I probably wasn't born depending on the actual date of release. I don't know. I ain't bothered to get that deep into the woods. It's what happens when blaxploitation gets a AAA budget and a bit of a sense of subtlety. There are those trademark high energy performances bordering on camp, the use of contemporary black music for the score, along with cameos from a bunch of late 80s heavyweights like Flavor Flav, Levert, and Guy. But most importantly, it was the first mainstream film that I could think of, at least, that portrayed a black crime lord as more than just a petty thug or a gangbanger. Nino Brown is smart, he's charismatic, but most importantly, he's in charge. This is made apparent during the first act of the film, where Nino sends a message to Don Aramateo. All right, I got it. Y'all think 5% of names are hard. That Harlem is his turf, period. And if the Don has a problem with it, then he can come solve it. Like I alluded to earlier with Bumpy Johnson, just the fact that he refused to bow to the white man was enough to make him a hero among his people, even if he often was the one doing the most direct harm to them. Funny how that works, right? Whether it's the Jews, Italians, or more recently members of Central and East Asian communities, there has always been a degree of tension between blacks and non-blacks who set up shop in black, oftentimes working, if not poor neighborhoods. Why? Because whether through money from a former life, from family, or from the old country, or literally a check from the feds to do so, if you're a Floridian Cuban, it at least feels like many non-black business owners knowingly do so with a bit of that colonizer energy, if you know what I'm talking about. You know, actively siphoning wealth out of the community that you're making your money in while not really giving anything back to it, thus perpetuating the cycle of black wage slavery, if for no other reason than by the time we can navigate all the institutional and systemic hurdles preventing us from buying back the block in the first place, the Rothsteins, the Romanos, and in my youth, the Kims and the Khans have already built a beauty store and a Popeyes on it. So when a black man tells the mafia to get the F off my block, it's symbolic of that black capitalist ethos of empowerment through self-reliant enterprise. And by extension, black nationalism, kinda. Okay, just go with me for a second here. The movie literally opens with Nino ordering the murder of a white man in a suit, or at least a vest and dress pants and loafers, it looks like. Watching that scene back, I couldn't help but see the symbolism here, because this very easily could have been another Negro, considering that his HQ is in Harlem after all. Or at least, does New Jack City actually take place in literal New Jack City? Because they like panned out on the Hudson Bay and Central Park at one point. I'm so confused. It's irrelevant to the point. Moving on, man. Or at least this could have been a white dude in a more street appropriate ensemble, a junkie even. But the fact that we can infer from the few lines of dialogue they share that this guy works for Nino in some capacity, and based on his dress alone, this guy wouldn't have any really real reason to associate with Nino unless the roles were reversed. And we can also assume that he's at least relatively well off to some degree based on his dress. Then we can tell off rip that Nino isn't just some small time P pusher. He's powerful enough to elicit both fear and respect from the respectable among us, to the point that he can kill a white man with relative impunity, which is by far the most outlandish thing in a movie in which Ice-T says this without breaking a smile. He has quite literally turned the historical power dynamic between black and white gangsters, and by extension, black and white people, period, upside down in one scene. It also can't be ignored how unequivocally black Nino's presentation is throughout the film. I mean, you got the Crayola box colored collarless suits, the gold chains, the four-fingered rings, that goofy Lego block Frohawk that AB co-opted at some point. Yeah, we really should have known something went right about this nigga when he decided to go outside like this in the 2010s. Everything about Nino screams black machismo in a way that only Jay Lethal could. Even the black Kangol is evocative of the berets worn by the Black Panther Party. And again, what made Frank Lucas such a legendary figure in the underworld wasn't really the size of his bag, but the fact that he, unlike his rival Barnes, was independent from the American Mafia. As portrayed in American Gangster, Lucas's plug was Ike Atkinson, whose plug was the infamous Golden Triangle, the heroin superhighway of Southeast Asia at the time. Barnes, on the other hand, was dependent upon and thereby beholden to the Lucchese crime family. Matter of fact, like I alluded to earlier, the council was based largely on the commission, and it's even alleged that Crazy Joe Gallo is the one who taught Barnes how to run a drug operation as large and as efficiently as his would become when the two befriended each other in prison. Matter of fact, if you connect the dots far enough, knowing that Gallo was seeking out allies among black gangsters, which again was unheard of at the time, one could reasonably assume that Barnes was the one who orchestrated the hit on his rival Joe Colombo, who's probably worth at least a TV movie himself, in either exchange for or as a thank you for Gallo putting him on to the mob's method of drug trafficking. I can't really get into all that here for the sake of time, but like I said, there's so many stories to be told here, and it halfway baffles me why they haven't been yet. If I didn't know the other half, we haven't gotten there yet. Anyway, back to Nino. One thing that always irked me about Training Day wasn't even the fact that it was Denzel's IOU for Malcolm X, but that at EOD, Alonzo Harris was still somebody else's pawn, which, I mean, this is the police we're talking about after all, so it makes sense. Brown, on the other hand, was his own man from basically jump to the end of the film. And like Lucas, his downfall was ultimately by his own hand and not by a higher power. Nino is portrayed throughout the film as a more than capable kingpin, a shrewd businessman, and a master manipulator. At EOD, Nino's ultimate weapon is his brain, and this is put on full display during his trial when he turns the tables on the feds and calls the justice system on the carpet for making him into the monster that he is. And I mean, like I always say, in every good lie, there is a kernel of truth. And in Nino's speech, there's at least half a bag of Orville Redenbacher in there. And that's what set Nino apart from most black gangsters we have seen in mainstream media to that point. Nino wasn't just a drug dealer. He was a businessman using drugs as capital. He was the closest thing to a black Don Vito we would get in Hollywood until probably Frank Lucas over 40 years later. And that was by design, man. Mario Van Peebles, who plays Detective Stone in the movie, also directed. He, along with Barry Michael Cooper, are largely responsible for the way that the lead villain is portrayed, as well as the impact his actions have on his community are portrayed. While Thomas Lee Wright did write the original screenplay, it was originally intended to be a Nicky Barnes biopic of sorts, described by author Carl Hart as The Godfather Part 3, but with H instead of Colt. I don't know, man. Take that part with a grain of salt. The only verifiable source I could get for that was Wikipedia, because I'm not going to buy a whole book to fact check like 10 seconds of audio. Hey, y'all got the bank. Y'all can make your own video and do that. Anyway, the script that we got was largely because of Cooper. Cooper was an investigative journalist for the Village Voice in the 80s. In 1987, he wrote 2 articles on the rise of YBI and the Chambers Brothers gangs in Detroit following the race riots there in 1962. It was these articles that attracted the attention of Quincy Jones, who had come into possession of the Nicky Barnes script at some point. I really don't know how that works out, but the point is Jones contacted Cooper to fly out to LA to rewrite the Nicky script based on his articles, and that is the New Jack City that we got. And I mean, when you do know the lore behind YBI and especially the Chambers Brothers, it's kind of obvious how the movie pulls from those stories. Like the whole taking over of the Carter houses is a play right out of the Chambers Brothers book, and like I said a while ago, was not too far from reality when and where I grew up. Matter of fact, part of me wonders if the movie inspired copycats in the real world. But my point is, again, that Brown's brain was his biggest asset, but only because it was inspired by real people. And this isn't really the way media typically portrays black crime, especially in working and underclass communities, and especially not in the 80s and 90s. It's less organized than it is opportunistic, which, I mean, if we're going to be real, all crime is opportunistic to some degree. What I'm saying is that black criminals don't have the same kind of sophistication that white criminals usually do in movies and television. Even less so is black crime justified, or at least rationalized in a way that white crime is, especially when it's white collar. Y'all may or may not know this, but most crime reports rely on police reports to do their reporting for them. And as I spent like an hour and a half talking about around this time last year, American policing is and always has been the armed wing of the state's program for poverty reduction by way of population control. Additionally, white supremacy is literally baked into the DNA of American policing, especially in the South and on the West Coast, where back in the day, literal Klansmen would moonlight as peacekeepers, and based on the Fed's own reports, that hasn't really changed all that much. Point I'm getting at is when you read a headline that says man dies during police altercation and it casually omits the fact that the reason he died was because Officer Dickhead placed his knee on the back of that man's neck for 8 minutes and 31 seconds, that's because Officer Syphilis casually neglected to mention that fact, and the only reason we know is because somebody taped it and uploaded it to the glorified snuff site that is Twitter. This is a problem that is endemic to both police culture and journalism, to the point that many of your favorite reputable publications, like basically every major news network and newspaper in the country, functions as a de facto PR department for the police in those areas and nationally, honestly. Matter of fact, the whole reason we don't see mafia the way we see black organized crime is because of The Godfather, both the movie and the book. The Godfather novel humanizes his characters in a way that mafiosi really hadn't been to that point. I mean, remember, this is the 60s after all. Italians were barely white even to this point in history. It paints a picture that says maybe there's more to criminals than just the crimes they commit. And I don't think that story would have been told if an Italian hadn't told it. Black, and for that matter, brown and Asian and indigenous people have never really been given that BOD in mainstream media until we took it upon ourselves to tell our own stories. Again, blaxploitation and all the camp and over the topness took care to remind this audience that at EOD, the people you see are products of their environment, which itself is a product of policy, which itself is a product of white supremacy. You see how that works, right? But this is where New Jack City sets itself apart and what makes it so important, if you ask me. How many of y'all, quick survey here, know what Lucky Luciano actually went to jail for? It was compulsory prostitution. And he described it himself, according to witnesses at one point, as, quote, no different than a chain store. Now, I'll ask y'all this. How many of you know how his operation actually worked? Luciano's men, and actually, pause for a second, trigger warning, like that. I'm not joking. Seriously, you might want to skip to the timestamp if this is too much for you. Luciano's men would basically con young girls, like teenage girls, into sex trafficking with the promise of a lavish lifestyle or at least a route out of poverty. At which point the girls would be placed in the care of a mom or madam, whatever you want to call them. And care really isn't the proper description of their treatment, but y'all get what I'm trying to say. The mom would then oversee as the girl was raped repeatedly to break her spirit, as well as force-fed drugs to keep her dependent. And as a result, the actual sex workers reap basically none of the fruit of their labor. This was life for them until the girl had racked up so much mileage that she broke down mentally, physically, and more often than times both at the same time, at which point she was tossed out on the street and just left to the wolves. What I'm saying is, despite popular media's depiction of him, Luciano, like basically every crime boss before and after him, was kind of a POS. But you don't know that because rarely, if ever, do you see the direct impact of his enterprises on the people impacted by them the most. And I mean, again, look at The Godfather, Goodfellas, every mob movie in existence, basically. They do about as much as Oppenheimer did to acknowledge the human cost of his actions, to acknowledge the human cost of their MC's actions beyond, the people closest to them. That's not the case with New Jack City, and that I think is primarily because of Van Peebles. Even before we get our glimpse of Nino Brown, we're introduced to the world that created him through a compilation of news reports describing the dire condition that the city is in.
Those at the top are getting richer. Over the last 3 years, the percentage of after-tax income for the rich rose 3%.
I mean, this is the height of Reaganomics era America, after all. And by this point, the under and working classes were already feeling the sting of the trickle-down fallacy, something that Nino is all too aware of. It's this condition, in fact, that leads him to conclude that people will do just about anything to escape that condition, even for a moment, even if that moment cost them their life. And not once does he or his crew express any sort of remorse for knowingly exploiting his community's plight for the sake of profit. The fallout of the crack epidemic is inescapable in this movie, to the point that the borderline over-the-top manner in which it's presented is kind of necessary for the sake of levity, if you ask me. Like, again, as someone who saw the aftermath of this era in real time, some of this ish still hits a little too close to home, to the point that there's a lot of media of this ilk that I just can't sit through anymore. Like, I kind of appreciate how on the nose the messaging is, if for no other reason. I feel like Van Peebles knew a whole bunch of people were going to lose the plot at some point, which they did, but we'll come back to that later. Like, there's literally a scene where Nino and G Money are hooping on a court with the words "crack kills" spray painted on the blacktop beneath them. Like, it can't get more ham-fisted than that, but it is ham-fisted in the best way, I think. Like, again, if it weren't for the constant reminders of just how much damage CMB has done to the hood and how little they seem to care about it, you'd be forgiven for being seduced by Nino's magnetism. And that's the thing. Nino presents himself as a Robin Hood-esque figure in this community, giving out turkeys on Thanksgiving, paying for the wedding of the local pastor's kid, handing out cash to unwary children. This is a tactic straight out of the Street Hustler's Handbook, one used by Bumpy Johnson, Frank Lucas, and even the Italian mobsters. When the people see you doing the thing that the state, that the church, that basically every institution in existence is supposed to be doing but isn't, at the very least they'll tolerate your presence, if for no other reason than to not bite the hand that's feeding them, even if the other hand has a gun held up to their head. Or maybe it's that gun hand that's really the reason they're tolerating you. What? I don't even know where that. analogy was meant to go, man. Just move on. Again, this is manipulation is all it is. This is what abusers do. They beat the hell out of you and then take you shopping afterwards, so you don't know what the F is going on, much less when it's time to leave. And we see the same pattern of behavior in Nino's treatment of Selena, waving off his open desire for G Money's girl with the claim that he owes his girl nothing for saving her from a life of shame and boredom. And he even does this with G Money when he berates him for feeling salty over getting cucked by his best friend. And I mean, this does open up the whole, light-skinned nigga stereotype conversation, watching it back, but I'll save that for another video that I may or may not archive once I'm done, because I really don't feel like dealing with some of y'all's for black grandparents race science BS, whatever. But let's stick to the movie. Point I'm getting at here is Nino Brown is kind of a POS. And if you didn't get that from all that I just said, then the part where he uses a little girl as a human shield should really drive that home. And yet somehow a bunch of people, I guess, must have taken a piss break during that scene every time they rewatch the movie. That is the scene I think personifies Nino Brown, and it gets to the ultimate message of the movie. It's that people like Nino, for as brilliant as they are predators at EOD, even cannibals. Remember, this is Sweet Sweetback's son after all. Matter of fact, he played Little Sweetback in the OG film. Remember, blaxploitation films more often than not had a message in the melodrama, one that spotlighted the plight of the black inner city. It's hard for me to watch Superfly and New Jack City and not see the former and the latter a lot. Matter of fact, I'd argue that the latter is in a lot of ways the spiritual successor of the former. Because, believe it or not, there is a message in Superfly, is just not told in a great way. But with that being said, whatever message Superfly was trying to get at, I think that New Jack City told it much better and with a lot more honesty. Because yeah, Nino is right that at EOD he is ultimately a product of the state's historical neglect and exploitation of black America. Like, crack is literally Reagan's fault to begin with. But at the same time, there's a big difference between Nino Brown and the average nickel and dime dealers of the world. Most hustlers, believe it or not, who know better at least, aren't really trying to build a criminal empire. They're just trying to make enough money to get out of the game alive and still live comfortably. So Frank Matthews, like, seriously, why doesn't this nigga have a movie yet? In a lot of ways, New Jack City is kind of the epilogue to Sweet Sweetback. While yes, the story of black oppression always ends with a higher power pulling the strings, that can't be an excuse we lean on to explain the pain we cause our own people away. And the ones who do so know this. Point being, solidarity can't be the excuse you give to justify exploiting your own people. And I told myself Jay wouldn't get no strays this time, but F it. Cue the jigger joke, Clarence. You heard me, Clarence.
Today, I'm feeling black.
But therein lies the issue with the movie, in my opinion, or at least with the way that the movie was received. New Jack City, unlike most blaxploitation films before it, was met with widespread acclaim upon its release, making Wesley Snipes into a bona fide A-lister and Chris Rock into a crackhead.
What about the good things that crack has brought into our mind that were not here before? You know what the good side of crack is? If you're up at the right hour, you can get a VCR for $1.50.
The movie actually out-earned Goodfellas, which had come out the year prior, meaning a significant portion of its audience was not Negroes. And many of the Negroes who did watch it were bougie as hell. And I mean, you can't really blame Van Peebles for telling this story in mixed company. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? It's policy that created Nino Brown in the first place. And policy is created overwhelmingly by rich white men using the sensibilities of middle-income white men and women, for that matter, to justify it. So yeah, there you have it. And I mean, I'm kind of doing the same thing on this channel. So point being, the message wasn't exclusively for black folks, even if that message was designed to serve the interest of black folks. That said, I can't help but feel like the nature of that mixed company kind of caused the message to get lost in translation a bit, or at least the meaning behind the message got a little bit lost, and some folks just ignored it completely, even willfully, if we gonna be honest. Nino Brown, much like mafiosi up to and including John Gotti, has become kind of a cult hero in some circles, especially in hip-hop ones. Probably the most notable example would be the Carter series of albums, which I didn't even realize until researching for this video to connect the dots between that and the Carter apartment complexes in the movie, but y'all get it, right? It's also created this pipeline of very bad New Jack knockoffs like the State Property movies and Hot Boys, which is like The Room of hood flicks if you've never seen it. In other words, you need to go watch it like ASAP. I promise you, you will not regret it.
I fed up with this world.
It's also created this deluge of prestige hood media now where somebody felt the need to give Fresh Prince of all things a gritty makeover, even if low-key, if you actually know the story of how Fresh Prince got made in the first place, it's a lot closer to the truth than the OG show. My point is, I can't really speak for anyone but myself when I say I'm kind of tired of seeing a new version of New Jack getting greenlit like every other month or popping up on Tubi. And I also have similar feelings about The Wire, but to a different effect. In its unflinching portrayal of what organized crime actually looks like on the street level, and furthermore the implications of such, a lot of people, specifically people who don't have to think about, much less live through that, use The Wire as poverty tourism and little more. And I mean, that's not the fault of the showrunners, but like I mentioned earlier, what does it say about the media's portrayal and thereby the impact on Black experience? And more importantly, what are the implications of that portrayal on the Black experience? Whether as a butterfly effect of its perpetual coverage of Trump or just due to force of habit, I guess, the national media has stoked the flames of this ongoing crime wave narrative that was probably a not insignificant reason why Trump won the White House in the first place. I mean, along with racist dickheadry, but that's aside from the point. Like I've said in past videos, this is USDA prime bull deficit, and every metric in the world says that crime has been on a steady and steep decline in America since the 70s, with a momentary spike in some violent crimes during and immediately following the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I mean small, like the side of Derek Chauvin's dick small. Despite this, according to multiple polls, including the Pew Research Center, most people believe crime, violent crime specifically, is not only on the rise, but is at an all-time high. Which again, no, no, it's not. And this is a direct result of the way that the media covers crime, though. Turn on the nightly news, and the first thing you're likely to see is a mugshot of stock photo angry Black ex-con, even when stock photo ex-con guy is actually the victim of the crime. And therein lies the issue, man. According to a study conducted by Vox Media in 2015, Black and Latino men are disproportionately cast and credited as terms like gangbanger, gang member, and thug, and whatever, with Black men accounting for anywhere between 60 to 66% of those roles, depending on which term you're looking at. A 2014 Media Matters study of 4 New York news stations found that anywhere between 73 to 84% of suspects in their reports of murder, theft, and assault were Black men. However, according to the NYPD police reports from the preceding 3 years, only between 49 and 55% of arrests for those same crimes were of Black men. So yes, according to science, the New York Police Department is less racist than the nightly news, which kind of explains this coverage of Palestine thus far. I'm sorry, Jeffrey. You said I get one. That was my one. Okay? Listen, I'm gonna tell you like this. I've seen your search history, nigga. If I'm going down, we're both going down. Tell your bosses that. Another study conducted in Los Angeles found that 37% of suspects portrayed in the local news were Black, despite Blacks only accounting for 21% of that city's arrest. While another study conducted in the same city found that of the homicide cases covered in the news, 43% of the victims were white, while of the reported homicide cases by LAPD, only 13% of those victims were white. Additionally, despite that disparity, 42% of homicides covered by the LA media involved a white victim and a black perpetrator, and these trends do remain consistent nationally. Point being, as I learned as a young journalism major, if it bleeds, then it leads, which coincidentally enough is Trap Lord Ross's entire business model. But when it bleeds and is black, or rather when the black is causing the bleeding, then your whole station is eating. And why do you think that is, bucko? Again, ask Trap Lord Ross. I've already talked at length in the past about how the historical dehumanization of black people created the tropes we've come to know and loathe today, like your Jezebels, your Mandingos, your Sapphires, and what have you. Again, I and a bunch of other people have talked at length about this, so I won't dwell. But I bring that up to make the point that black men, according to society, are literally just built differently. And no, not in a good way. This ain't that video, man. We are inherently aggressive to the point of hyperviolence, which leads us to criminality. We literally just can't help but to get into some mess, not because of any systemic, institutional, or even just interpersonal prejudice against us, but just because that's what society says black masculinity is. And that's especially true for those of us who come from places like where I grew up. And for as long as there has been a Western media, that media's depiction of blackness has been informed by what society, and more accurately, a white supremacist society, says it is. This winds up creating a vicious cycle where media presents, even perpetuates an image and a narrative to society that was informed by that society to begin with. And I'm speaking from experience, man. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've met in life who just assume because of the color of my skin and where I grew up that I just had to have been in the streets at some point. I just had to have been in a gang before I got to college. Which, I mean, like I've said in the past, I didn't do myself any favors with. Like, I was basically a B-Walk tutorial away from clapping my first set of snow bunny cheeks before I could hear the cries of my Hotep family members from across the river. So I didn't go far enough away is what I'm saying. Jokes aside, I think the point I'm getting at is words have power, and even more power does an image have. Like I said before, the vast majority of non-black people in America don't have close enough relationships with black people to actually know black people. So they rely on media to tell them what they're too afraid to ask their dreadlock coworkers. And that's dangerous, man. Life-threatening even. In a 2002 study published by the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, participants were asked to play a video game that showed photos of either a black or a white person holding a gun or some other object like a phone, a wallet, a dildo, or whatever. The participants were told to quickly decide what the person was holding and to shoot if they thought that that object was a gun. The vast majority of folk got it right, but the it that they thought they were told to think about was not the it in question here. Participants shot at the photo of the black person an overwhelmingly more number of times than the white person, regardless of what object they were holding. And the scariest part about it, a lot of participants were black. Which kind of brings us, or at least me, full circle, man. I don't know when this video is going to get uploaded, so I might have surpassed it by then, but at the time of writing, I'm basically knocking on the door of 100,000 subs, which I'm trying as best I can to just take the dub, but I'm literally just not wired that way, man. So this is a thank y'all in advance to all of y'all that got me to this point to begin with. Like, I'm dead serious. I literally could not imagine sitting in front of a computer or a TV or a phone or whatever for 4,000 plus hours to get myself the partner, let alone the millions it took to get me to this point. Like, I really, that's part of the reason why I got an editor, y'all. I cannot stand to listen to my own voice or watch myself talk for an extended period of time. Hey, just is what it is. That said, part of the reason I can't really take the dub is because that milestone to me is more a sobering reminder of what I am now than it is a victory lap to be taken. Because as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, I am probably the biggest black male creator on this platform that's not just saying the things that I'm saying, but saying it from the perspective of a project baby. I'm basically the designated hood nigga of Cornbread now, and I really don't know how to feel about that. Especially knowing what I know now about, let's just call it, some of the contradictions about LeftTube. Because some of y'all may not know this, but we, and by we I mean us creators, we can see who y'all are watching besides us in our analytics, or at least we can see like the 10 or so channels with who we share the most viewers in any given period of time. And I mean, YouTube doesn't ask for the race of its watchers, and if it did, it probably violates some civil rights law or something, and even if it didn't, it would pretty much be useless anyway. It would be like the age verification on smut sites, basically. But we can at least infer the race of our audience based on who else we can see y'all watching. And let me tell y'all something, a good chunk of Cornbread's audience is very, very white. Even mine a lot of times, believe it or not. And I mean, it's not a super big deal, especially if you're trying to hit those 100, 200, 500K subscriber marks. Like, call me crazy, but I don't really think you can hit those marks relying solely on black folks. Like, if you think that that's a successful business model, try opening a restaurant in the hood and see how quickly niggas start asking for discounts. That said, if the point of Cornbread is to be, you know, cornbread, and the intersection between us and the white folks is basically so big that it's a circle, what's the point of calling it Cornbread, nigga? Like, seriously, what is the point of this space if all it's going to be is a window into a very specific form of black identity for white folks? And again, I don't mean that as though it's an inherently bad thing, but I'm just saying, I thought that this was supposed to be more than just that. It's something I've been ruminating on for the better part of like a year now, and a question that I ask myself more times than what's healthy, to be honest. Like, believe it or not, I don't want a segregated audience. Don't get that twisted. Believe it or not, the Hotep head in my PFP is meant to be a joke. Girl, sense of humor, y'all. And again, I get it. I'm fortunate enough that I can say whatever I want and lose as many followers as necessary to stand on my square, because this is not my primary source of income. But I'm not going to lie. I can't help but think that maybe Cornbread is not as radically black as we think it is, consumer and creators alike. Something I often say to people who know me well is, if you're really going to change the world, like really change the world, then you better damn well be prepared to rub a lot of people the wrong way. And I'm sorry, I just feel like a lot of us are too afraid to do that, man. Too afraid to speak with our whole chest, if we even know how to begin with. Too afraid to play insider baseball because it'll alienate the uninitiated. But in the process of making ourselves palatable to as many people as possible, the people who we at least say we carved this space out for don't even want to F with it like that, because it is so diluted. I don't know, man. Maybe we're all just Jay and Bay, but in a lower tax bracket. Maybe we're all just cosplaying revolutionaries for a payday at EOD, just playing the hits for a crowd of people who don't know or want the whole catalog. They just want to see a black face co-sign their opinion in politics because, yeah, surely I must be right if the Negro says so, dude, brother Jack. I really started to feel this way earlier this year when I had a bunch of folk practically begging me to make a Palestine video, or at least something about that song Macklemore did. Never mind the fact that I have voiced solidarity with Palestinians multiple times and even gave y'all a master list of where and who to send your money to, and even advice on how to protest without getting docked by the feds. But no, that wasn't good enough. We need Bill to tell us for the umpteenth thousandth time why genocide is a bad thing. Yeah, my Twitter feed may be packed to the gills with images of bombed out hospitals and dead babies. And yeah, there may be like 50-11 documentary length videos from Middle Eastern creators like Lost Futures, for example, giving you everything you need to know that you didn't already. But nah, that's not good enough. We need Bill to say something. We need him to say anything. We need the nigger to dance when we tell the nigger to dance. And I'm sorry, but I ain't that nigga, and I never will be. And that's why a lot of y'all consumer and creator, melanated and mayonated, don't F with me like that. Or people like me for that matter. I've been fortunate enough that my audience has been relatively diverse from basically the birth of this channel. At any given time, I can share an audience with the likes of Tara Monarchy and Jesse Earl alongside people like O'Shea Duke Jackson and ABBA and Preach and Joe Button TV. Matter of fact, I think I had 19 keys in there at one point. And if you don't know who that is, yeah, that's kind of the point that I'm getting at here. In other words, niggas that most of y'all don't mess with. And for good reason, a lot of times, I'll be real. I was halfway shocked myself until I thought about a little deeper why they come here. The people who are watching these outlets are primarily black men of a certain ilk. A lot of them, some of y'all will call problematic without even knowing anything about them besides the content they consume. More important though, they more than likely come from a class of folk that would be called in this space the lumpen proletariat, the underclass, if you will. And I'm sorry, but aren't those the people, the ones that we're supposed to be at least trying to reach in the first place? I thought this space was supposed to be a safe one for blacks of all backgrounds to explore and hopefully adopt this kind of radical politic. I thought that we were supposed to be the ones to make Fanon and Hooks and Matthews and Dubois, but hell, even Marx, Gramsci, and Bakunin et al. Make sense to people who weren't blessed like we were to get a scholarship to go learn about them from the white folks and with the bougie blacks. I thought Cornbread was supposed to be the alternative for niggas who didn't want to hear white folks talk about black folks' business anymore. Matter of fact, I know this was the case because I am niggas. And if not, then again, what is the point of this space besides circle jerking each other off for having the right opinion, or more accurately, for being seen by the right people having that opinion? But that's kind of the rub, isn't it? It's only a certain kind of nigga who feels welcome in this space. I know because I've talked to the ones who don't feel that way. And I'm not saying it's by design. I'm not even saying it's on purpose. But what I am saying is, in our endless pursuit to please the algorithm, what if we're pushing away the people who need us the most? And more importantly, do we even care, man? Like, I can't articulate the level of secondhand embarrassment I felt when some of y'all decided to jump Khadijah for just saying, maybe we should show a little sympathy to the men folk every now and again.
Y'all, I'm not gonna lie. It felt like anything men did, we were like, what? Why are you breathing?
Dynamite's gonna make everything all right.
Euphoria, shut the f up. I know that was you. I ain't even gotta look.
But then again, I can't say that I was surprised by that. I have jokingly said on a community post a while back that the thing they don't tell you about making video essays is that half your audience is this nigga. For the uninitiated, this is Jimmy from Barbershop, and he is by far the most insufferable character in the series that co-stars Cedric the Entertainer doing the dollar store version of that barbershop scene from Coming to America. A lot of people, for whatever reason, said that Jimmy was a hotep, but no. Jimmy is not a hotep, man. He's much worse than that.
You know what? That was a passionate and surprisingly well-articulated argument. You mocking me? Not at all, sir. I applaud your virtuosity.
Jimmy is the dude from your block who did make it. He took a couple of community college classes, or hell, he maybe even went to the big time university. Maybe he even went and got his master's or his doctorate. But for all his book learning, he forgot how to talk to people without being a condescending prick about it. And I don't mean in the playful way like I do. This nigga really thinks he's the smartest guy in the room at all times just because he talks like T.I. When Jimmy starts lecturing about gentrification or over-policing or basically any other black identity issue, it's not to educate his coworkers. It's to prove to them how much smarter he is than they are and how much better he deserves than they because of that. This is a different kind of scared of hoes energy, the kind where the hoes are intergender. Jimmy is so loathed by his own kin that they'll defend the white boy against him because at least the white boy doesn't act like his stuff doesn't stink just because he wipes his behind with pages from the new Jim Crow. Jimmy's problem is his education makes him arrogant. He thinks himself above the ones among us with less decorum, despite the fact that they live and work in the same hole. And that's what makes his coworkers keep him at arm's length at best until he begins to see the error of his hubris. Until a street nigga shows him that he could have matched his wits the whole time if he really wanted to do that.
For your information, a scallop is a shellfish.
No, I'm afraid it isn't.
No, I'm afraid it is. Because it's a mollusk. Before it comes to your dinner plate, it got 2 shells wrapped around it just like a clam.
Even in the second movie, when Jimmy does get out, when he does make something more of himself, it's all love when he comes back to the shop. That is until he goes back into BS mode. That's the problem with some of us, I feel like. We're stuck on BS mode. And part of it is that a lot of y'all haven't been to the barbershop to begin with. And that's because you never had to. You don't want to. That's the difference between Jimmy and a lot of other folk. He at least interacted with the people who he felt were beneath him enough to at least give himself, if not a justification, then at least an explanation. But again, most of us don't even have that. Probably in large part because of the hip hop summer videos, my audience is melanated significantly practically overnight. At least again, I can infer as much at least. But the thing that got me excited is they're not just black folks, but based on what else they're watching, they're hood niggas and niggas for that matter. I've also gotten a bit of a bump in female viewership. Somehow I don't really know why. Maybe it was because of that tight booty shirt I wore for the Aura ad read before. Don't get used to that. That's not going to be a habit, y'all. The reason I was excited is because this was the goal from the time I did that white leftist video, because that's the audience who I feel need to hear not only what I, but the rest of Cornbread is saying the most. And because I've been around them my whole life, I know that a lot of them are not going to hear it unless it comes from the mouth of someone who's walked in their shoes, even if the person is black. Reason being, most of us don't acknowledge, let alone mess with those folk until or unless it's to clown them for what they believe or berate them for their behavior. That's what draws a lot of those folk to this channel, I believe. See, when I make fun of hoteps, it's in jest. It's pretty clear from the way that I talk about them that, yeah, I believe that a lot of what they believe and espouse is goofy as all get out. That's obvious, but I don't really hate them for that. But for most of y'all, there's a real disdain in the way you talk about them. Because again, a lot of y'all never really had to interact with one until you went to college. Hell, a lot of y'all went to college and still haven't interacted with one outside of the internet. You just found out what a hotep was when you saw Kyrie burning sage. But what if I told you that? I'm going to save that for next month. But my point is, a lot of these people that y'all despise are the people with whom I empathize. Because even if our methods, even if our ideology is polar opposite, the goal is still the same. Black nationalism. Even if our interpretations of such are, again, practically polar opposite. And I'm not willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's something to work with there. They recognize that and they respect me for that, even if they don't agree with me most of the time. They know me, even if not personally. I am Big Cuz to them. I am OG. I am them. And that's the reason a lot of the rest of y'all, again, don't F with me, including the blacks. My point is, I am not like most of the other people in this space, saying the things that I am saying the way that I am saying them. For some of y'all, that's off-putting, and for others, let's keep it a buck, it's kind of intimidating. And I mean, I get it. You can't rock on everybody's boat. I understand better than anyone that I am a lot to handle. Believe it or not, I am my own worst critic. But that said, I'm more than likely never going to have the kind of platform that FD has, let alone, you know, someone like H-Bomb or ContraPoints or anyone else of that level of repute. Because I just don't care about making white folks and bougie blacks comfortable enough with me to share me on Reddit or in their community tab. What I do care about is making a space for my cousins, my god brothers, my aunties, my uncles, my homeboys and girls, and for all of them to come and to learn without feeling a type of way for not knowing what a lolcow means. But what does that say about you, the viewer, and even some of you creators, that you can't tolerate, let alone interact with someone you don't interact with regularly for more than 30 seconds, that you'd probably cross the street if you saw me in real life. Matter of fact, you definitely do that if you've met me on the internet. I am not cuddly like FD. I'm not eternally affable like Farman. And this is no shade to either of them. They're both good friends of mine, or at least Farn is. FD, the beef is still on, nigga. Nah, never mind. Y'all killed the bit. Well, whatever. It was fun while it lasted. Matter of fact, speaking of FD, I remember when he had shared the joint that I did about life it was like 2 years ago, I think, at this point. And the comments on that post range anywhere from, yeah, this nigga is speaking facts, man, to gee willikers, FD, why isn't he more cuddly like you? And again, that's not shade to him. Sometimes I wish I were as cuddly as him, because some of y'all won't pay attention otherwise. But my point is, I would have never gotten to this point, I believe, without FD's cosign, his constant and consistent promotion of my work. And the reason is, I am an above average size black man who yells. I have a bald head, big arms, and a baby Philly beard, or at least when it's not cut down, it is. If I were a dark skinned man, I'd basically be that angry black man meme personified. Or at least that's what your implicit bias tells you about me. And again, I can't stress this point enough. I am not talking to just the non-blacks in the room. Like I've said multiple times here and other places, I am not a tough guy, at least not relative to the environment I come from. But that's just it. A lot of qualities that make people look the other way without even giving one of my joints 5 minutes before not just casting judgment on the joint itself, but on me as a person, are the same qualities that attract that audience I've been targeting since the White Leftist video. And the fact that it does just make me think that maybe LeftTube is not nearly as progressive as we believe, or better yet, presented to be. And I mean, whatever, nigga. Take 2 of these. Call me in the morning and tell me how you feel. But this isn't really about me personally. It's about people like me. Replace Lil Bill with John Lewis or Bellamy or Overthrow Media or any other creator who comes from a similar environment or experience and who aren't scared or ashamed to wear that experience on their sleeves. The result is almost always the same at EOD, and it's the same people who decide that, oh, well, they're just not my cup of tea. Or maybe you just don't like tea to begin with, is what I'm trying to say. My point is, as thankful as I am to have reached this point, if we really live the lives that we sing about, then it probably shouldn't have been this hard. And more importantly, I shouldn't have been the first one to get here. And I mean, in a vacuum, again, it is what it is, different strokes and all that. But my point is, in a space with people whose personal politics, at least nominally, is some amalgamation of kumbaya and give us free, I don't know, man. It just kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth, especially considering that a lot, if not most of what we talk about doesn't even impact us directly nearly as much as the people we lock out. Again, whatever, nigga. But it brings me back to my point that no matter how progressive your politics are, no one is immune to propaganda, man. Especially when it just reinforces what you already believe. So what does all of this have to do with the movie? Well, I don't really know, man. My brain just went left at Albuquerque in the process of running every white creator on this platform away from this channel. I guess I'll wrap up by saying this. That for me, New Jack City is in a lot of ways the quintessential blaxploitation film, both in its execution and the impact of it. There's a reason why we're taught not to handle family business in mixed company and even in front of some family. I think the DNA of New Jack City can be seen in basically all of black cinema from then until now. Some people, I feel, took the wrong message, or worse than that, ignored it completely. And then others got the message but without the context to make it make sense, and thus it kind of lost its meaning. But it doesn't have to be that way. This isn't the white leftist video, so don't worry. I'm not about to, make some declaration about how I'm not effing with cornbread anymore. So don't go start no drama, y'all. But what I am saying is, I don't care about making The Godfather, man. I'm trying to make New Jack City. I'm making something that's so black that some people might not get it. They might even be turned off by it, but that's okay. Y'all that follow my community posts notice I use a bunch of insider baseball terms, and I hardly ever bother to explain what it means, because if I did, then it isn't insider baseball anymore. Like I said in one of those hip hop summer videos, some folks can tolerate being on the outside looking in, but if it means building a house where my people don't feel alienated, then so be it. We'll just be misfits together. And no, they're not perfect. Some of them have warts, very big warts, but that's my point again. They're never going to know any better if no one takes the time to teach them better without pointing and laughing while they do so. My hope is eventually we can all get to that point where we stop fishing for cosigns from white folks at the cost of connecting with our own folk. And to the whites and non-black and browns who have stuck around to this point, I commend y'all. Man, I applaud y'all even. Like, I mean that genuinely, because what I have asked y'all to do over the course of these 2 or 3 years is to sit in the back of the room, basically, while I, hold court with my kin. And if you do glean something from the things that I say and apply it to your own experience, that's been extra credit to me. And that is not an easy thing to do. I know I did it for 4 years as an undergrad, but again, as a black man in America, that's what I've had to do, and that's what we all still have to do. And that's why we made cornbread, man. But I don't know, maybe we're no better than the niggas who made Hot Boys. Maybe we lost the plot trying to make ourselves palatable by focusing a little too much on mass appeal or on our own little hut within the village of black identity, as opposed to, the village itself. I don't know. So this isn't me saying that this is what it is, but it is me saying that I don't want to do that. And I have no plans on doing so. I don't know. What would make this video easier? A dick joke, white humor, right? Dick joke. There you have it. Penises.